Well, it looks like that's a very effective announcement. Just say, I'll be giving a spiritual conference after Mass, and you can really clear out the church in no time. I'll have to remember that one. It reminds me of a story that I read in a book, I think it was called Why Catholics Cannot Sing or something like that. But it was a story of a Sunday morning where, for whatever reason, the priest had to do a switch in the Mass schedule. The people were used to 8 o'clock, I don't know, low Mass, 10 o'clock high Mass, 11 o'clock low Mass, something like that. And for whatever reason, the priest had to switch it so the 8 o'clock Mass was the high Mass or the sung Mass. So the priest announced before Mass, excuse me, for a change of schedule, we'll have to make this the high Mass today. And just about everyone fled from the church. Because they weren't especially excited about it having a Mass. It was half an hour longer with all that singing going on, you know. That was back in the whatever, 60s or maybe 50s, I don't know what, something like that. So I'm just looking for the page where we left off in our history of the society. And I'm almost there. So you know that the Archbishop was kind of feeling out the situation in the 1980s about, you know, if the society would continue. And he saw that in order for it to continue, it would have to be self-sustaining. And self-sustaining meant that it needed at least one bishop to continue ordaining priests and also giving confirmations. So he spoke about that in the Sermon of the Ordinations in June in Écône in 1987. And within a couple of weeks, Rome contacted him because Rome caught wind of that sermon. They contacted him and said, Archbishop, you know, don't be so precipitous, you know, jumping ahead. Don't be getting ahead of the game, or don't be some other expression like that. And so he consented to have some negotiations or conferences, consultations with the men of Rome in order to see what they had to offer him instead of consecrating a bishop. Let's put it this way, I'm sorry. The Archbishop went to those negotiations with one intention, to consecrate at least one bishop from a priest chosen from the Society of St. Pius X. But since, like we said last week, Archbishop Lefebvre still recognizes in Rome the authority which comes from God, and they called upon him at this moment. So he said, well, I must answer and see if they have the same consideration as I do for the future of the church. If they do, maybe we can do it Rome's way. If they don't, sorry, we have to consecrate a bishop, at least one, because this work of tradition must continue. So those were the conferences or negotiations or talks, whatever you want to call them, that the Archbishop entered into, starting, I think, in about, summer, September maybe, of 1987. I think I was around at that time in my second year of seminary, and we would hear about it occasionally, about how the Archbishop would go for a conference, and then he would talk about it with his seminarians in Écône, and then we would hear about it eventually at our seminary, and how the officials in Rome were so polite and so respectful towards him when he would visit, which was very impressive. But Archbishop Lefebvre knew Rome very well already before that time, so it was nothing surprising to him. But when it came down to talking about doctrine, well, Rome was not giving him everything that he thought the society needed. So with that sort of review and backdrop, we'll continue with how this story of the consecration of bishops continues. We have the question is if Rome, the officials of Rome, and the Archbishop had the same goals. We know they don't have the same principles. The principle of the Archbishop is our Lord Jesus Christ deserves his rights. And that means that both the church and governments must submit to him. Those are the principles of the church. Those are the principles of Archbishop Lefebvre. Does Rome have those principles? No. Rome's principles are the main criterion of all judgment is the conscience of man. And so if a man chooses to worship God, that's magnificent. If a man chooses not to worship God, that's also magnificent. That's the bottom line of Rome. So we know that their principles are different between the Archbishop and Rome, but are their goals the same? The goal of the Archbishop when entering into these discussions or negotiations with Rome is to discuss the society's Catholic character. Because if you remember, the year was 1988. It had been at least 12 years and much more, 12 plus years, since the Archbishop had been maligned and calumniated. That's where they made up lies about him, that he was making his seminarians take oaths against the Pope, that he was not getting permission from local bishops to receive his seminarians, that he was saying that Icon and the society was his own church, but it was different from the other church, all these kind of lies. And the Archbishop wanted to answer those things. So he was kind of happy that finally they gave him a platform upon which he could discuss the society's Catholic character. He wanted to protect the society so that he could live this Catholic life. The question is that the same as the goal of Rome? And we will see that I don't think so. It seems like the goal of Rome is something like, we're not going to openly expel the Archbishop because he has too much of a following. And if we expel him or make some public, some spectacular affair out of getting rid of him, that's going to provoke too much reaction against us, and we won't have the answers for everything that comes against us. Very similar to our blessed Lord, when the Pharisees and leaders of the Jews wanted to either accuse him or stone him, or I don't know what, they held back from doing that because they saw that our Lord had a lot of followers from the Jewish people, and they did not want to provoke the people to be against them. So we see this repetition going on here in the year 1987. So the Archbishop told them in Rome, he said, if you agree to let us try the experiment of tradition, there will no longer be any problem. You remember on the side of Rome, their line was, if you agree to say one Novus Ordo Mass, there'll be no longer any problem between us. We'll see that your principles are not so waterproof, that you do admit of liberalism, and that will be fine for us. You can just go on saying your traditional Mass after that, but just say your one Novus Ordo Mass. And of course, the Archbishop of Lefebvre, the Archbishop never consented to that. But now on the other side of the coin, we have the Archbishop telling them, please, let us try this experiment of tradition, and there will no longer be any problem between us. We will willingly submit to the Pope. I think included in that remark of the Archbishop is, you have to give us a future in the society. It can't all die with me. The year was 1987. The Archbishop would die less than 4 years later. You have to give us some assurance that the society can continue. Because with the society at this time, moment in history, seems to be the vehicle that our Blessed Lord and Our Lady are using so that the church continue. And it's not in my hands, it's not in your hands to say, end of the society. That would be in the hands of our Lord and our Blessed Lady. And therefore, what can you do to guarantee that the experiment of tradition can continue? If you can't guarantee that continuation, then we'll have to come up with a solution ourselves. So, what do you give us so that this experiment of tradition can continue? And we will willingly submit to the Pope. And as we study, so that's, let's say that as in today's language, that's what the Archbishop put on the table. And what does Rome want? What is their goal? And it seems to be merely to gain leverage over the society in order to eventually transform it into another Novus Ordo institution. Meaning, Archbishop, come and talk with us. We'll work something out with you. You can have your traditional Mass, but it will have to come at some sort of guarantee to us that we can move your group more and more towards not just the Novus Ordo Mass, that's important, but also the Novus Ordo doctrine, the Novus Ordo catechism, the Novus Ordo morality, and the Novus Ordo way of life. And now we're here, what is it, 33, 34 years later? And we can see that's exactly what has happened with every other group that Rome formed with the traditional Mass promised. The most famous is Fraternity of St. Peter, but there's also been this event in Brazil, in Campos, where they also signed some sort of agreement with Rome to have the traditional Mass, but with submission to the local bishops, and also something called Institute of Christ the King, and also something called Society of Good Shepherd. These are all what they call Ecclesia Dei congregations, meaning they get their traditional Mass, but it comes at some price. The price being, you cannot have exclusively the Novus Ordo Mass, doctrine, catechism, and morality. You can have your traditional Mass, but you're going to have to accept, and with some conditions, like once in a while you have to offer the Novus Ordo or be present in the Novus Ordo, but then you also have to accept the modern doctrine, theology, morality. So it seems like Rome's goal was merely to gain leverage over the society in order to eventually transform it into another Novus Ordo institution. So, you have the Archbishop announcing there in 1987, if, at his ordination sermon, if the society cannot continue without at least one bishop to guarantee its integrity for the future, then we must proceed to fill that space for the society. You have the Archbishop announcing something like that in a sermon. Rome gets wind of it, and their answer is, quick, let's talk with him so we can convince him not to do that. Not because Rome is so afraid that the Archbishop is going to kind of dig a hole for himself and they're concerned about the society. They don't want it to look like a fool. No, I don't think that's Rome's concern. Rome's concern is that the Archbishop is a man of a lot of credibility, universally, internationally. And if he does something like that, it's going to put the reproach up against them that Rome could not come up with a better solution to make sure that tradition was preserved. They're going to look like the fools. If they behaved in such a way that the Archbishop would have to do something so radical as that, is to make new bishops for this society, then they're going to look bad. And so to save face for themselves, they get in contact with him. Well, let's, don't move so rashly, don't move so precipitously. Let's have some sort of conference about this. I'm sure we can work out a solution whereby you will have a future in the society. And you won't have to, and they don't ever say it, but they behave this way. And you won't ever have to consecrate a bishop. Let's continue to study the story. So it becomes clear that Rome does not want to give the society its own bishop. They want the society to depend on local bishops for ordinations and for confirmations. And every time that the Archbishop brings up the topic of, will we get a bishop chosen from one of the priests of our society, Rome sidesteps him. They change the topic. But the Archbishop is very, he's very intent upon this, very adamant intent upon this, because he knows that the whole reason that Rome has called him in the first place is because he announced that in order to assure the continuance, the integrity, the future of the society, we must have another bishop. He knows that's the root, that's the motivation, that's the catalyst for any of these conferences with Rome. And therefore, every time they meet with him, he's not going to forget about that topic, even though they want him to forget about that topic and they never speak about it themselves. So Rome keeps sidestepping this issue, and they keep putting this topic of another bishop for the society off till later. I'd like to add a little parenthesis here. The year was, 1987. It was fall. We were already hearing about the number 3 bishops for the society. So the Archbishop is only talking with Rome about one bishop, just to see if they will, just he's only asking for the bare minimum of continuation of the society and the integrity of the church. And we will see if it develops from there. But they won't even consent to that. So the Archbishop continues to keep this issue of a bishop in the forefront. In about December of 1987, and I told part of the story last week, the Cardinal something Gagnon of Canada spent some time at the Econ Seminary doing it's not an investigation, but let's just say a kind of participation in the community life there. He was sent as a visitor from Rome to study the situation at our seminary in Econ. And I told you about how he helped to receive the engagements of the seminarians there. So that's all Rome approving of the existence of the society. And this man, this Cardinal, Gagnon, said, I will certainly make sure that Rome gives you what you're asking for. But then even he, Cardinal Gagnon, behaved the same way. Whenever the Archbishop mentioned the topic of the bishop, our next bishop, who will it be? Can he be from amongst our ranks? If you read the biography of Bishop Tissi de Malaray on this topic, Cardinal Gagnon would get sort of a foggy, cloudy look in his eyes that says something like, let's not get so concrete around here. Rome is smiling upon you by this visit in the first place. Why do you have to be so demanding and negotiating at a time like this? But that didn't stop the Archbishop from saying, no, we need the continuation of tradition. And if you're not going to give us something viable, we're going to do it ourselves for the glory of God. And when we are going to do it ourselves means I'm going to do something which it's obvious that Rome has to preserve the church, and therefore by doing this, we help Rome to preserve the church, consecrating a bishop. So we fast forward a few months and we arrive at the month of May of 1988. Archbishop Lefebvre submitted names of his own priests for consecrations as bishops for Rome's consideration. I'm going to guess that at this time he committed at least 4 names. I could be wrong. At that time, we were hearing only 3 bishops. It turned out that it would be 4 eventually. And then, even at that point, if you want to consecrate 3 bishops, you probably give more names that are necessary to Rome, so they can study the portfolios, the dossiers, and make their decision. Okay, of these 6, I'm just guessing, of these 6 that you have submitted, we choose these 3, something like that. So, on the 3rd of May, 1988, Archbishop Lefebvre submitted several names of priests amongst our society priests for possible consecration as bishops. With a whole file, I'm sure. It wasn't just a name, but a whole file that they could study. 1 month more passed, and we arrive at the 5th of May, 1988. I'm really jumping over a lot of history, but there we are. 5th of May, 1988, and there was what they call a protocol, let's say I guess you would say agreement, that Rome presented to Archbishop Lefebvre to say, which said something like, okay, these are the goals of your society, these are the principles of your society, this is what Rome thinks of them, and this is how Rome is going to treat you with these principles and goals. The Archbishop said that this protocol was supposed to resolve the situation between Rome and the society. Meaning, as far as the Archbishop was concerned, there was nothing un-Catholic in this protocol. There was nothing against the faith in this protocol. And it did seem like Rome was being very respectful towards tradition. On the question of bishops and consecrating a bishop, the protocol said that a consecration of a member of the society appears useful. consecration of a member of the society appears useful. It didn't say you will have a consecration of a bishop. It says a consecration, blah, 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 appears useful. And we will go back to the Holy Father and suggest that he choose a candidate from the society to become a bishop. So that was in the protocol. And the Archbishop signed that. So I want you to know that. The Archbishop signed that. And I'm sure some of you have read about that in the biography. That was a night that the Archbishop did not sleep. He said it had been several months that he hadn't slept well, but he did say that night I didn't sleep at all. And he said, not that voices came to him, but his own mind was reproaching him, kind of saying, Archbishop, what have you done? Where are you going? How can you continue with that protocol that you just signed, thinking that the integrity, the continuation of this Society of St. Pius X is guaranteed? Because it's not. It's true that Rome says you are doing a good job and we approve of it and we like it, but that's in the concrete, in the practical, there's nothing on that protocol that says you will have a bishop on such and such a date. So the Archbishop's own conscience kind of reproached him with that the whole night. And he got out of bed and made a letter. Sorry, back to when he was thinking that night. He said he kept coming back to the point of why the meetings for the whole year with Rome over the question of a bishop, if they're going to finally come to a protocol that says nothing about a bishop. The whole foundation was that the society must have its own bishops. But there was nothing in that protocol that guaranteed even one bishop. So he got up, he got out of bed, he went to his desk, and he wrote a letter to then Cardinal Ratzinger. You probably know that Cardinal Ratzinger was the churchman chosen for 1987, 1988 to have the contact and to direct the consultations with Archbishop Lefebvre. Therefore, the Archbishop wrote to Cardinal Ratzinger in the middle of the night. The Archbishop said that he did not reject the protocol, but he did add a practical provision that Rome give him a guarantee that they will allow him to consecrate a bishop on the 30th of June, 1988. He wrote that in his own hand, nice humble hand, no computer, and a little note and a little envelope. And he passed it the next morning to, I think, one of his priests who was on his way to visit Rome about these issues. As far as the Archbishop was concerned, this practical, concrete addition to the protocol, please allow me to consecrate a bishop on the 30th of June, 1988, was a test of Rome's good faith. If you really mean these things about being interested in tradition, seeing the future of the church in tradition, loving the work that we ourselves are doing, then you will also give us this sign of good faith of letting us have practically letting us have a bishop. Or this practical sign of good faith of letting us have a bishop. I'm going to go back a little bit to study this protocol and some of the conferences between the Archbishop and Cardinal Ratzinger when this protocol was being formed. Apparently, there were some things that Cardinal Ratzinger had proposed during the year of meetings that were not so hopeful. Such as that about once a year in our big church in Paris, I think it's called Saint Nicholas de Chardonnay, that Cardinal Ratzinger was saying, just to show your union with Rome, just to show your union with the church, please offer a Novus Ordo Mass once a year in that parish of yours in Paris. That was an unfortunate thing. It was not in the protocol, but that was an idea that Cardinal Ratzinger had kicked around during the 1 year of meetings. But when it came to the protocol itself on the 5th of May, 1988, the Archbishop never thought that he had compromised on the faith by signing it. There was nothing in that protocol which was un-Catholic. He described the protocol as good in itself and as acceptable. Otherwise, he would not have signed it in the first place. But without the guarantee of a bishop, this protocol was weak. So the archbishop sent back to them saying, you must add the words that we can consecrate a bishop on the 8th of, whatever date that was, 30th of June, 1988. And Rome sat on that issue for a few weeks. Rome stewed on that issue. And I think the archbishop was perfectly, at peace, perfectly confident with what the Holy Spirit had guided him to do in this whole issue. So the 30th of May rolled around, the end of the month, still no word from Rome. And the archbishop called a meeting with the various leaders of tradition who were non-members of the society. You may know that we have friends, religious orders, which are Benedictines and Dominicans and Carmelites, both male and female. And they all have their religious superiors, and they all like the society because when it comes to ordinations, they rely on the society for those ordinations of priests. And they, in turn, they're receiving their priests from the society, so that they're the ones that give them the sacraments, and they're the chaplains of their religious orders, again, whether male or female. So all these groups came to the archbishop for a meeting at the end of May. It's still about 1 month before the actual consecrations are going to happen, or exactly 1 month. And he asked these leaders of tradition, what should we do if Rome does not guarantee us a bishop? And this is an area where it might seem like elections are happening or democracy is in place in the society. That's not exactly what's going on here. But the archbishop is looking for, I would say, a consensus. If people were to say, absolutely not, you may not consecrate a bishop if Rome says no. Or, absolutely yes, you must consecrate a bishop. We don't care what Rome says, that sort of thing. He's looking for a consensus, as if to say, I'm not the only brain here. I'm not the only one who's got a sense of judgment. I am interested in seeing what my colleagues, if you want to call them that, have to say. And this is an interesting detail. Among the different priests who are leaders of tradition, or who were leaders of tradition at that time, not members of the society, there was a little bit of yes and a little bit of no. Yes, you should go ahead and consecrate a bishop even if Rome says no. No, you may not consecrate a bishop if Rome says no, among the priests. And then we get to the sisters, all the feminine religious orders, and they were unanimous. They all agreed, you must consecrate a bishop. If Rome says yes, good. If Rome says no, we don't care. Tradition must continue. Good job, sisters. Sometimes with the men, we got all these distinctions going on, and maybe we got some egos on the line too. You're saying that, but because of this, and that, you're wrong, and we should actually consider this, and I don't know, we go back and forth. But that's not the first time I heard that. I heard that before with, I was visiting, or I think I was actually giving a retreat to religious sisters in Mexico City, the Franciscan Minimas. And the superior, who was actually an American at that time, she said, whenever there's a bunch of commotion in the society and the priests are all doing a lot of talking and what should we do if Rome does this, and what should we do if Rome does that, and what should we do if the society does this, and what should we do if the society does that, while the men are doing all this talking and getting all excited on the telephone, the women are all in church praying, and they have no problem at all with whatever the society decides. She happened to say that. And that would ring true with what I'm saying right now. Opinion was not divided among the sisters. They were all agreed, we must have a bishop, with or without Rome's permission, in order to carry on the work of tradition. It's like so obvious. Got to hand it to the women for that. They're just very connected to what's real. And, you can't have your head in the clouds. There's no way we're going to educate this next generation of children if we're playing sort of a game between whether our authorities are modernists or whether authorities are traditionalists. No, we need traditionalists, and that's the end of it, say the women. Well, it happened to be during that very meeting on the 30th of May, 1988, the Archbishop received some sort of message from Rome. I think they were using fax machines back in those days. The Archbishop received a message from Rome saying that Rome had rejected all of his proposed candidates for bishops. So thank you for the 6 names. We don't want any of them. I'm making up the number 6. I don't know if that's what the number was. But if he wanted to consecrate 3 bishops, even though he's only asking for 1, he probably submitted at least three names and probably more. So thank you for the names. We don't want any of them. That's kind of an interesting detail for me because what does Rome know about our priests in the society to have enough judgment to say, we reject these 6? Maybe based on the information that was in their file, I don't know. Or maybe Rome had studied us enough by that time by having their visitors or whatever to our society, that they knew who these candidates were and said, no, we don't want them. I would guess that, the names of the candidates were all names, as far as Rome was concerned, no, these men are too anti-liberal, or these men have too much character on their own, too much conviction on their own. We want someone who's a little bit more easygoing, not so fixed on, tradition, and someone that we can kind of coax in our direction. And maybe they saw that none of these candidates were like that, so they said, no, rejected. There we are. So it's precisely during that meeting with all the heads of tradition that the Archbishop received the word that Rome had refused all of his proposed candidates for bishops. That was the moment that the Archbishop concluded that Rome was not interested in protecting tradition. So you see what a long process this has been. The Archbishop has done nothing rash. He's done nothing like getting ahead of himself. He's relied on providence. He's looked at the signs of the times. He's proposed something. He went into negotiations. He gave Rome plenty of time to cooperate with this. And when it became obvious that no, they're not interested in tradition, and also the Archbishop has consulted the other members of tradition, the family of tradition. When it's become obvious that Rome is not interested in protecting tradition, he says, okay, we'll proceed. That's when he determined to consecrate bishops. Not just 1, not just 3, but 4. That was great news when we heard it, by the way. It was so obvious that I'm not going to be bullied by these guys. That was pretty much the message we received when we heard this sort of story at seminary. So he consecrated 4 bishops on the 30th of June, 1988. It's possible that one of the Archbishop's criteria for the 4 was to have someone in each part of the big 4 languages, someone who represented strongly each one of the 4 big languages that the society uses, which are, what are they again? French and German and Spanish and English. I guess it would be Bishop Tisi de Madre, Bishop Fellay, Bishop de Galarreta, and Bishop Williamson. I suppose that might be one of the criteria he used for choosing these 4 bishops, these 4 candidates. So that's also, I like that judgment too, which is very practical. I'm not going to choose someone who's spectacular in this or known for that, but we got to cover the map, gentlemen, so let's choose one from each major language and carry on practically. So after the consecrations, Rome accused Archbishop Lefebvre of a schismatic act. That was all predicted by the Archbishop, and that's the reason he had that meeting with the other leaders of tradition. When the accusations of schism and excommunication come over us, are we going to hold together as a family? And since it was more powerful in the direction of, you must consecrate a bishop with or without Rome's permission, it's true that all these leaders of tradition held together as a family, for the most part. There's some exceptions, and we might get around to that. So Rome accused the Archbishop of a schismatic act. Schism being doing something in separation from Rome, without the permission of the Pope, and in some way against the Pope. Rome accused him of that. Well, what is ironic in this accusation is that Rome thinks that consecrating bishops is a schismatic act despite their new belief in collegiality. Collegiality is a big old concept of Vatican II, which means the Pope is great, but the bishops are too. And the Pope's decision is good only if all the bishops are in agreement with him. Kind of giving the bishops together the same power as the Pope. It says that every bishop has a governing authority. This is not the traditional doctrine of the church at all. It's their idea, collegiality. Then you get the archbishop who consecrates bishops, and all of a sudden they say, no collegiality for you. Why aren't they going to be consistent with their own new pseudo-doctrine of collegiality? They should have respected what he did, because he was just showing his authority as a bishop. But no, they accused him of schism. The archbishop was not setting up a parallel church, modernism for you, tradition for us. He was not doing that. He was not even pretending that his bishops have any authority in the church at all, meaning they are effectively auxiliary bishops. They have no jurisdiction. The 4 bishops that archbishops have consecrated. They give confirmations and ordinations, perhaps have a moral authority when they speak. We take them more seriously or give more attention to them. They write letters and give retreats, perhaps with more moral authority, but it's not authority of jurisdiction, which is what a local ordinary bishop of a diocese has. This is not a schismatic act by any traditional sense of the word. However, Rome excommunicated him for this act. Now, just to give you a proper respect for these terms, schism and excommunication, normally, a consecration of a bishop without the approval of Rome is a very serious crime. However, excommunication is a punishment that the church gives for certain grave sins. The society has never recognized the excommunication because this was not a grave sin. To consecrate bishops to make sure that tradition would continue with its integrity. Rome, on the other hand, since we're considering so much about whether society is excommunicated, whether it's schismatic and all the rest of that, let's change the chip a little bit here. Let's see what Rome did wrong in this story. They were guilty of asking the archbishop to abandon the souls of tradition so that these souls could be swept into the modernist current that was destroying the church. Now, if you want to talk about crimes, let's look at them. The archbishop is like this left pioneer soldier hanging around who's got the power, because of being a bishop, to make sure that the church continues. Everyone else abandoned the fight. No, Bishop de Castromayor, I'm sorry. He's out there too. And Rome's coming down on this man as the great schismatic and they're going to excommunicate? No. Let's turn the table around here. You, 2,495 bishops who went along with this new religion, you are the guilty ones. Don't go looking at us for schism and excommunication. Look in the mirror. Rome was asking the archbishop to abandon souls of tradition so they could be swept into the modernist current that was destroying the church. Don't go blaming the archbishop. He's just a reproach to your conscience. He's just the occasion. When you put up this, this mirror, you all see your guilty reflection in him. Time for you all to change your act. Don't come down on him. So, they accuse him of disobedience. But this disobedience, in quotation marks, was only apparent. It was not real. Was that 20 years? Something like that, 88 to 98, 90. 20 years would pass about, and Rome would withdraw the excommunications of the four bishops, saying that this excommunication, this decree of excommunication, no longer has strength, no longer has validity, some expression like that. But 20 years after the consecrations. Kind of interesting, because the Archbishop had said, when he consecrated the bishops, he said, don't worry, Rome, the church cannot go on like this. I give it at most 20 years, and this will all be over. Well, that was a prophecy he made, which is not true, because we're 34 years after the consecrations now, and Rome is still the way it was, and worser. But about 20 years later, they did say the excommunications have no validity. So that was a big thing right there. In the year 2009, Rome withdrew the statement, the decree of excommunication on our four bishops. This is an implicit recognition that it was not a schismatic act. Because once you commit schism, you cannot withdraw from, you cannot leave schism. I suppose you could come back to union with Rome if you really were in schism. But without doing that, you cannot withdraw schism from anyone. The society did not change its position from 1988 to 2009, and therefore the charge of schism was taken away from it. No, the society remained with the same position, and Rome came around and said, no, you were never schismatic in the first place. The Archbishop is pretty smart. He's got this philosophy going on in his mind, which is correct. If you're with the truth, let them level whatever accusation they want at you. Sooner or later, truth is going to win this battle. And he's right. We haven't seen the complete victory yet, but it's true what he says. Schism itself is an excommunicable act. By saying you were never excommunicated, they're saying you're never in schism. We're going to study a little bit the Archbishop in a more general sense now, a little bit outside of this question of schism, disobedience, excommunication, consecration of bishops, etc. Some say that the Archbishop had like a personal battle going on inside his mind between faith on one side and obedience on the other, given the idea that the Archbishop was true to the faith, and because of that, he had to be disobedient to the Pope. That is not true. The Archbishop did not have a struggle going on in his mind between faith or obedience, or faith and obedience. Superficially speaking, it is a convenient description. On one side you have the faith, on the other side you have obedience, and either one or the other, but you can't have both during this time of crisis. Nevertheless, in reality and objectively, there can never truly be a conflict between faith on one side and obedience on the other. Obedience is never truly opposed to the faith. Obedience is always working at the service of the faith. True obedience. You can read our pamphlet out there in the vestibule about true obedience. It's the one that has Abraham with a sword, with a dagger raised, about ready to stab his son Isaac in order to sacrifice it, because God had told him, you must sacrifice. If you really love me, you will kill your son. If you really love me, you'll sacrifice your son to me. And Abraham was obedient to him and was about ready to sacrifice his son, and God said, okay, hold your arm. I'll give you a sacrifice, but you've been obedient. The point is, even though in these days, since about the 1960s, the word obedience has been used to make everyone go along with a modernist heresy, you can study the kind of obedience they were demanding, which is something like, well, if you don't go along with this, it means that you don't respect God, you don't love your superior, you're just a fake person. But the tough people who have been able to say, no, I need the traditional Latin Mass and the traditional doctrine, traditional morality and catechism, etc., and that's being truly obedient. But if you're going to demand that I fall for some sort of modernist mass and false doctrine or false catechism, well, then you're not being obedient. So how can I obey you when you're being disobedient? In this way, faith and obedience cannot be opposed to each other. What appears to be disobedience on the part of the Archbishop is actually obedience to the true God, while those who are demanding obedience from him are being disobedient to that true God. There can never truly be a conflict between obedience and faith. What is really demanded by one virtue, for instance, faith, is always reconcilable with what the other virtue demands. We don't have virtues that are opposed to each other. All virtues come back to the same truth, which is our Lord Jesus Christ. How can they be opposed to each other? By the light of faith, we understand the nature of authority, etc. And by the faith, we also understand that sometimes we must obey God rather than man. By the light of faith, we understand the nature of authority. What is the right thing to obey? Who is being truly obedient? Nevertheless, I have to give this warning that this is a very dangerous situation to be in, because all of us can exploit it, take advantage of it to our own selfishness. The Archbishop was being truly obedient by continuing the work of tradition, even if the Pope didn't want to go along with it. Any one of us could sort of grab hold of this concept and abuse it. It would be so easy to say, I am being obedient to God rather than man, and sort of carve out for ourselves our own spiritual life. Or imagine you're a priest or a religious, and you get all disobedient, doing your own thing, living in your own house, no superior around anywhere, and you say, well, that's because I'm obeying God rather than man. It's a little bit more practical for me in the case of a priest, and you, I don't know, leave the society. I'm very sorry if it doesn't sound too hypothetical anymore, but I've seen, I guess we've all seen many priests leave the society, and they give us that impression more or less, well, I had to leave the society because I thought they were going modernist, and therefore I'm being obedient to God rather than man. Meanwhile, they're going out there looking for their benefactors and building their own buildings and I don't know what all, saying that this is the true church that I'm building up here with my one or two buildings and my one or two benefactors. No, that's a little bit, self-minded, self-serving, not so God-serving. Nevertheless, when the faith is in danger and there are extraordinary crises, we are going to have to obey God rather than man. And the necessity of making that discernment is inescapable. I'm sure the Archbishop felt it coming at him year by year, more and more strongly. Sooner or later, we have to do something radical and drastic to make sure that tradition continues. Because Rome is not giving us any signals that concretely they wish to preserve the tradition. They say nice things to us every once in a while. They also say nasty things to us very frequently. But at the end of the day, I don't think they're really concerned. In the long run, they're not concerned about preserving tradition. So this necessity of making that discernment was inescapable for the Archbishop. So there's some milestones for the society that we've covered so far. 1970 was the founding of the society. 1976 was when Rome, represented by certain French bishops that dealt with the Archbishop, said, no more ordinations at your seminary. If you do, you'll be suspended ad divinis. And the Archbishop ordained seminarians without a hitch, without missing a beat. They accused him of being suspended ad divinis. He continued to say Mass, ordain priests, do confirmations, all the rest of it. 12 years passed, since that was milestone number 2, 1976. 12 years passed, milestone number 3. And they recognized the archbishop as if he's a bishop of the church without any problem. He didn't change a thing. And they came around to him saying, consider what you're going to do. Consider what you do before you consecrate bishops. Milestone number 3 is the consecration of bishops. And this is a large point of departure between those who have been faithful to the principles of the church in tradition, or those who were just tagging along with the society. They've got some principles of the church, but they're also mixed with, compromised by principles of modernist Rome. But they like the archbishop, some of these leaders of tradition, so they follow him also. But at the consecrations, some of them broke off. I don't know of many of them that did, but it's a pretty famous case of Dom Gerard. And I'm going to mispronounce this word. Good thing Father Gomez is not here. He's at the monastery of La Barue, someplace in France. And this priest, Dom Gerard, who had founded this monastery, said, no, we don't agree with the archbishop in consecrating bishops. To tell you the truth, I don't think it was so much of a doctrinal issue. I think it was an issue of egos, once again. So many things are like that, especially with us guys, with us men. Got a doctrinal problem, blah, 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 blah. And you study the thing long enough, you say, God, he's got a problem because he's not the archbishop. He wants to be the archbishop. And he would have done exactly the archbishop if he had been in his position. But he's not the archbishop, so he wants to make a little bit of noise. And it means he's going to break off his faithfulness to Archbishop Lefebvre, something like that. But there we are. That's kind of a concrete, realistic case. These consecrations were a point of departure between those who have been faithful to the principles of the church and those who were just kind of tagging along with the society. These people that broke away from the society did not accept all the principles of the church. It didn't need to be that way. They could have stuck with the society and continued to absorb the principles of the church, but they decided not to. And I just gave you a real-life case of that with Dom Gerard. Archbishop Lefebvre deliberated for a long time before he consecrated bishops. He was making a decision that was going to impact souls for years. Some could have disagreed with him and still kept all the principles of the church. That's true. I think a case of that would be Michael Davies, may God rest his soul, from Great Britain. He wrote excellent books, The Apologia for Archbishop Lefebvre, etc. At the consecration of bishops, Michael Davies disagreed with the archbishop. He went a different way. That was 1988. Michael Davies passed away now, 15 years or more, somewhere between 2000 and 2005 in that area. And the last year or two before he died, he knew he was going to die from cancer. He was making conferences going all over the world. It wasn't a big apology conference. I'm sorry, I was wrong, the archbishop was right. No, but he was going around to many of our different centers of the society saying it was right to consecrate bishops. Because here we are, at least coming close to the end of my life, and we don't see any signs of future for tradition coming from Rome. So at least take this concrete case. If it weren't for the archbishop consecrating bishops back in 1988, it would all be over now. Or we'd be relying on those pioneer war soldier priests of the first ordinations of the archbishop, but it would be over, shortly. So that's a case of someone who did not agree with the archbishop at the time, but he kept all the principles of the church. Michael Davies did. Eventually he came back. There may be other people like him who are also separated and still have not come back. But the important thing is to keep all the principles of the church. And the case I gave you of La Barue, he did not keep the principles of the church. In that monastery, they have to accept the thinking of the Novus Ordo Mass and the Novus Ordo doctrine, theology, and way of life. Those who did not accept what the Archbishop did in 1988 have never accepted it since. Oh, except for the Michael Davies case. And then there are two groups of those who have not accepted what the Archbishop did in 1988. They have either changed their own principles into, we must obey Rome at all costs. They've changed their own principles, talking like that now. And that's not the way they used to talk before the Archbishop consecrated bishops in 1988. We must obey Rome at all costs. Or the other group is those who have misunderstood the crisis. And they say, you know what? It's really not that bad after all. What's going on in Rome, what's going on in the church, it's not that bad after all. So we have to sort of maintain only the traditional Mass and only the traditional doctrine. We'll have a little bit of both. And because the crisis is not that bad. Things did not have to be this way. But you always have to plug in that element of human error, or human, that's more than error. I guess it's human bad will. The church is good. The church will always exist, at least till the return of our Lord Jesus Christ. It is doing supernatural work. One person living a supernatural life is worth millions that are not living a supernatural life, even if they also belong to the church. Even they belong to the church too. One soul is out of this world, so to speak, because he's in grace. You're measuring the infinite against the finite. So the church, I suppose, has had a lot of corruption. A lot of corruption. And I'm sure it still has a lot of corruption. The church is going to continue. I forgot exactly why I was talking about that. But it didn't have to be that way. Oh, that's it. It didn't have to be that way if people sort of insisting on their own way and leaving the Archbishop. But it is that way. And the society continues and the church continues. So we have to be thankful to the Archbishop for the continuation of the Catholic faith. I hope that's not a presumptuous remark. But, if you study other groups and other dioceses and all of it, everywhere you see that there are major compromises there that do not allow for the future of the church, that do not allow for the future doctrine, theology, and morality. They don't allow for it. There's a catch. There's a compromise. There's a failure in one way or another that those groups do not hold water. They do not resist the world. But thanks be to God, and by the grace of God, the society, being what it is able to promise the continuation of the Catholic faith. I'm not saying that it's the whole church. I'm not saying that it's its own church. I'm just saying that it works for the church at large, and it has what's necessary to continue the Catholic faith. And we have to be thankful to the Archbishop for that. And that was greatly due because of the decision he took on the 30th of June, 1988, to consecrate bishops. If he hadn't done that, I don't do the math. He consecrated 200 priests before 1988. That's a lot. From 1970 to 1988, in the space of 18 years, he consecrated 200 priests. Now we're at 600, maybe 7, I don't know. I lost count at 500. I think we're into the 600 area or more. It's tripled in the last 30 years. What if we were relying on those first 200 priests at this time, keeping in mind that a lot of them have left the society too? It would be over soon. The whole thing would be over soon. But on the contrary, we've got 600 plus priests with the hope of a future because we have bishops and we have seminaries. Maybe not all of them are full, but we have seminaries. And we're talking about the second or third generation since the society was started. So, those are the grandparents of the boys that are in the seminary right now who were fighting for tradition back in 1970. As 40-year-old people or something like that. Yeah, as 40-year-old people. This has required courage on the Archbishop to consecrate the bishops, has required courage, it's required humility, and it has required prudence. We pray that we ourselves may be faithful to his legacy. And we'll close with a prayer. Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Saint Philomena, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen.